So now, in order to be effective in this debate, and I do a lot of debating, by the way. I do a lot of debating on college campuses, mostly in law schools, as a guest of the Federalist Society. There are a lot of young people, I want you to know there are a lot of young people who agree with your position. There are a lot of them out there, and it's my job at the Ruth Institute to find them and to support them. So there'll be some little hardy band of kids who will invite me, 4 or 5 of these, countercultural radicals, will bring me in, and so I'm like the only person who will do this. So I get to go all kinds of cool places like Little Rock, Arkansas, Houston, Texas, and other cool places like that, Waco, Texas, all those great places. Debating same-sex marriage, so-called. So,
Fully married.
So, I think the first thing we have to do is to ask ourselves this. What is the essential public purpose of marriage? What is the essential public purpose of marriage? Why do we have marriage in the first place? What is the point of marriage? And I would say to you that the essential public purpose of marriage is to attach mothers and fathers to their children and to one another. That's the essential public purpose of marriage. Now, it's essential in exactly the lawyer's sense. That is, but for this purpose, you wouldn't need marriage in the first place. If you didn't need to attach children to parents, no one would have ever thought of the idea of lifelong sexual exclusivity. Right? I mean, it just wouldn't have entered anybody's mind to do that. But we do need to get this job done. And so, because of that purpose, we have the institution of marriage. And you see it across all times and places, all cultures. It's not some unique, freaky Christian thing. You see it everywhere. One man, one woman, marriage. Now, why is this? Why do I say it's the public purpose? I want to pause on that for a moment, because I know y'all have a lot of libertarians out here. That you could privatize marriage. So we want to say a little bit about that, all right? This is a public purpose. Attaching mothers and fathers to their children and one another is a public purpose, as opposed to the whole set of private reasons why people sometimes get married, right? So privately, why do I want to get married? Well, maybe I want health insurance. Maybe I want to get out of my parents' house. Maybe I want to get my parents off my back. Maybe I want to irritate my previous boyfriend. Maybe I want the pretty dress. Whatever, all kinds of private reasons why you want to get married. But all of those taken together don't add up to a public reason to have marriage in the first place. And that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about public policy of the definition of marriage. Why do we have it in the first place? We're not really that interested in all your private reasons. We want to know, why does the government have any interest in somebody's relationships? Why do we care about it? We care because we have to attach mothers and fathers to their children and to one another. Now, I say that this purpose is public as opposed to private, but it's also public in the sense that it's irreducibly public. That is, you can't privatize it. Because when you say, these two people are the parents of these children, you're also saying, no one else is. No one else is the parents of these children. Not the grandma, not the previous boyfriend, not the babysitter who actually spends more time with the kids than they do. No, none of those people are the parents. That is a public job, right? So some little old contract that you make between the two of you is not going to do that job, because the minute you have some kind of dispute, you're going to need somebody to settle your contract, and who would that be? That would be the government, right? So the government will be involved coming through the back door, if not involved in the front door, if you see what I mean. So it's an irreducibly public purpose that cannot be privatized. And when people say, well, let's just get the government out of the marriage business and privatize it, or leave it to the churches, something like that, that is, I believe, a lazy answer. I really think that is a person who has not thought the thing through all the way to the end. It really can't be done. And oh, by the way, we're going to leave it to the churches. There are certain candidates who talk like that. We'll just let the churches handle it. Does anyone seriously believe at this moment in history that the government will allow the churches to be the final binding legal authority on any subject? Do you really think that's going to happen? Considering they won't let us run our own institutions, now all of a sudden they're going to let us run people's marriages? I don't think so. So that, again, is a kind of dream. It's not serious. That's a non-serious proposal to say that we can privatize marriage. So I put that in your minds because I know you have people probably in this state who talk like that. And by the way, back on the back of the table, I've got a one-page sheet that I wrote up that's called The Libertarian Case for Man-Woman Marriage, and it's kind of a summary of a much longer article, so if you want to pick up a copy of that on your way out, feel free to do so. So now, I would say, let me say just a little bit more about this public purpose of marriage. I've been talking about it from, sort of necessity and so on, why we have to get it done. I want to pause a minute and look at it from the child's point of view. Because children often get lost in the shuffle of this whole argument, all right? Let's look at it from the child's point of view. I would say to you that children are entitled to have a relationship with their parents. Children are entitled to know who they are, they're entitled to know what their origins are, and they're entitled to love and care from both of their parents, the people who brought them into being. And if that's not going to happen, you need a reason. You need a good reason. If you're going to deprive a child of that, you need to have a reason. You just do that willy-nilly, right? And I think most people intuitively agree that children need and deserve and are entitled to a relationship with both of their parents. However, that's an entitlement that children cannot defend on their own, right? A little child cannot march into court and say, see here, my rights are being violated. Someone get over here and do something about it. By the time the court gets it straightened out, your little 5-year-old is no longer 5 years old. And of course, you only get 1 year to be 5 years old, right? That whole developmental process is going on while the courts or whoever is trying to straighten this all out. So it's not good enough to make restitution after the fact. We have to protect children's rights proactively. And that means that every child has a legitimate interest in the stability of their parents' union. Right, the stability of the parents' union. Why? Because mom and dad getting along with each other is kind of how kids get to have a relationship with both mom and dad. Mom and dad live on opposite coasts, or mom and dad are fighting all the time. This is really hampers the child's ability to be in relationship with both of them. So for the child to have their interests met, their legitimate rights here, their legitimate rights and needs met, we have to do something proactively for them. And marriage is adult society's institutional structure that protects the rights of children to the knowledge and care of both of their parents. It's an institutional structure, not a set of contracts or anything like that. It's something set up in advance to protect the rights of children. That's what it's about, I think. And if you look at it that way, you can see it's a duty and justice to children that we have something like marriage that protects their interests in relationship with both of their parents. So with all of that in mind, let's ask ourselves what would happen, what will happen, what is in the process already of happening if we redefine marriage. If we remove the gender requirement for marriage and say that marriage is no longer the union of a man and a woman, but marriage is the union of any two persons. Well, we already can figure out what's going to happen, what that's going to be like. But before I start this, let me point something out to you. That marriage is the institution that connects the generations to each other. If you connect mothers and fathers to their children and to one another, you're connecting generations to each other. That means that the full impact of changing the definition of marriage in some important way is not going to appear in the first 3 years or the first 5 years. It's going to take a full generation for all of the incentives that you put in place to work themselves out through the social system. Just as we saw with no-fault divorce. We didn't figure out what no-fault divorce was going to mean the first day after Ronald Reagan signed that bill in 1968. It took a long time for people to realize that, yeah, actually kids are harmed by divorce. Yeah, actually we've changed. Actually, your divorce does affect your next door neighbor. Actually, changing the rules changes the rules for everybody. Right? So I want you to have that point in your mind too, that a lot of what we're talking about, people look at you and say you're being alarmist, or you're being hysterical, you're being overwrought. No, I don't think so. I actually don't think we are. I think we're taking responsible care for the future generations. That's what I think that we're doing. So how do I think that marriage, that redefining marriage is going to affect society? I believe there are at least 4 major principles or sort of understandings, you might say, that are going to be undermined by the redefinition of marriage. So 4 key, what do you want to call them, understandings or presuppositions or principles of law, public policy, and social practice that same-sex marriage will undermine. And I would invite you to jot these down so you can think about them later. The first one is that same-sex marriage, redefining marriage to remove the gender requirement, undermines the basic principle that children are entitled to be in a relationship with both of their parents. It undermines that basic principle, that children are ordinarily entitled to be in a relationship with both of their parents. Now, we know that there are a number of ways we know that. We know, for example, that the Iowa Supreme Court has already said such a thing. The Iowa Supreme Court said, well, it's a myth that children need mothers and fathers in order to be brought up healthily. Right? They're already talking like that. But more to the point, sort of more structurally, I want to sort of take you down to the base of this thing. But how is it that man-woman marriage attaches children to their parents? How does that work? And how will redefining marriage change that? Let's talk about that for a moment. When a baby is born, there's always a mother somewhere close by. That's just the way it usually works. Although we do have to now put a little asterisk up there as an exception for surrogacy, for surrogate mothers. She could just be a hired hand, but for the most part, rent a womb, you know, there's outsourcing actually, don't laugh, I'm sorry, I don't want to gross you out or make you laugh, but the reality is that surrogacy contracts are being outsourced to India where it's cheaper. Okay, just so you know. It had to happen, right? I mean, the sexual revolution meets the free market. Whoa, okay. Not what Adam Smith had in mind, I wouldn't think. But anyway, so the social problem isn't usually attached the mom to the baby. Usually the social problem is, who's the daddy, right? Mommy's baby, daddy's maybe. So the way marriage accomplishes this objective is through something that is called the presumption of paternity. The presumption of paternity means that all the woman's children that she bears during the life of her marriage, her husband is presumed to be the father of all of her children that she gives birth to. So if you're a married woman, you have a baby, your husband is presumed to be the father of any children that you give birth to. And if you take that legal structure, which is an operating legal structure, even as we speak, that's still true, if you combine that with the social practice of monogamy, sexual exclusivity inside marriage, what do you have? You have a very clear picture that marriage attaches biological parents to their children, right? Because if you're sexually monogamous and you're married, in 100% of the cases, this set of practices is going to attach children to their biological parents, okay, period, full stop. However, when you bring same-sex unions into the situation, what the courts are doing at the behest of the legal establishment of the law schools and the sexual anarchist law schools and feminist lawyers and so on and so forth, what they're doing is taking the presumption of paternity and transforming it into the presumption of parentage, a gender-neutral term, you see, that's supposed to keep everything equal, right? Because it's gender-neutral. What could be better than gender-neutral? It's a presumption of parentage that would apply to any couple, anywhere. Except you can see that in the case of a same-sex couple, it's not equal, it's not operating equally with respect to the child's interest, because the child is not being attached to their biological parents anymore. The child will be attached to one biological parent and somebody who is not their parent, okay? So the marriage or the union, that legal institution, becomes the vehicle that detaches a child from one of his parents. Rather than marriage being the thing that attaches children to the parent, it's something that detaches children to their parent, from one of their parents. And so it undermines the principle. In their effort to treat the couples equally, you see, we've undermined the principle that children are entitled to a relationship with both of their parents. Okay? So that, I think that that's a serious issue. In effect, by redefining marriage, we're redefining parenthood at the same time. But we're not even really talking about it. We're just sort of gliding over that all we're doing is making things equal and involving people, including people who are currently excluded and so on and so forth. But in fact, what we're doing is redefining the meaning of parenthood, okay? So that is the first point where I believe that the redefinition of marriage is going to undermine an important social principle.
GrokTV.